In the summer of 1944, near Camp Concordia in rural Kansas, Maria Benedetti, a first-generation American-Italian grandmother, discovers 4 escaped German prisoners of war hiding in her barn during a thunderstorm. Despite the wartime tensions and her own son fighting overseas in Europe, her deeply ingrained values of hospitality and compassion compel her to offer them hot soup and shelter for the night. Word of her unexpected kindness spreads rapidly through the prisoner network at the camp, and by dawn, her modest farmhouse porch is surrounded by 150 German POWs who have walked miles from their work details, drawn not by the promise of escape, but by the rare offer of human dignity and a grandmother's cooking in a foreign land far from home. Maria Benedetti lived a life measured by seasons, by the rhythmic hum of cicadas in summer and the sharp bite of Kansas winds in winter. Her days unfolded in the quiet cadence of habit, a widow's solitary dance with memories in a small farmhouse that smelled perpetually of baking bread and simmering herbs. At 66, her hands, gnarled from years of kneading dough and tending a stubborn patch of tomatoes, still moved with purposeful grace. Her eyes, the color of rich espresso, held a deep well of resilience, inherited from generations of Calabrian women who had found strength in soil and family. This patch of Kansas, where she had made her home since her youth, was a far cry from the sun-drenched olive groves of her parents' village, yet it had become sacred to her, a testament to a life built from scratch, brick by brick, harvest by harvest. Her only son, Antonio, was somewhere in the heart of Europe, swallowed by the brutal maw of the war. Every telegram that arrived in town was a fresh stab of fear, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life. Maria kept a faded photograph of him on her mantelpiece, a young man in uniform, his smile a ghost from a brighter past. She prayed tirelessly, rosary beads worn smooth from countless repetitions, each Hail Mary a plea for his safe return. Her patriotism was a quiet, fervent thing, woven into the fabric of her daily existence, expressed not in fiery speeches but in the meticulous rationing of sugar, the careful recycling of tin, and the endless work that fueled the nation's effort. But beneath the stoic exterior, a constant ache resonated in her soul, a mother's fear for her child, fighting an enemy she only knew through newsreels and whispered anxieties. The town, Concordia, was a mosaic of hard-working folk, their lives intertwined by shared joys and sorrows, and now by the unifying burden of war. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew of the German prisoner of war camp just outside their quiet town. Whispers and rumors about the Boches circulated, painting them as a faceless, dangerous enemy, a necessary evil contained behind barbed wire. Maria, with her strong Italian accent and the foreign aroma of her cooking, was always an outsider, albeit a respected one. Her minestrone, her lasagna, her tiramisu, these were bridges she built, small culinary offerings that transcended cultural divides. Yet, a subtle distance remained, a sense that her world, rich in tradition and old-world sentiment, was distinct from the pragmatic, American-first ethos that permeated the wartime air. The war, for Maria, was not just a global conflict. It was a deeply personal struggle, a constant negotiation between duty and the immutable laws of the heart. The summer afternoon had been particularly oppressive, the air thick and still, promising a fury yet to come. Maria had spent the morning canning tomatoes, the kitchen a steamy inferno, but now, a strange, heavy silence had descended. The sky bruised to a deep, bruised purple, and the distant rumble of thunder rolled across the flat plains like an approaching army. She hurried about her small farm, securing the chicken coop, checking the latch on the barn door, her movements quick despite her age. There was an isolation out here, a vulnerability that heightened with the approach of such storms. The wind began to pick up, a low moan at first, then a rising howl that whipped her apron around her legs. Rain, fat and cold, began to lash down, blurring the edges of the world. She sought refuge in the familiar confines of her kitchen, drawing the curtains. The scent of fresh minestrone, a comforting anchor in the suddenly chaotic world outside. It was during a lull in the storm, a brief, eerie silence punctuated only by the drip of water from the eaves, that she heard it. A faint creak from the barn, then a muffled cough. Her heart leaped into her throat, a cold stone of dread. It couldn't be the wind. Clutching a heavy iron skillet, her only available weapon, she crept towards the barn, her footsteps barely audible above the renewed rush of rain. The barn door, which she swore she had latched, stood ajar. Pushing it open, a gust of wind tore through the cavernous space, rustling the hay. And then she saw them. 4 figures, huddled together in the far corner, half hidden by a mound of hay bales. They were young men, barely out of their teens, their faces pale and streaked with dirt, their clothes, the unmistakable drab uniform of the German Wehrmacht, soaked and clinging. They looked like drowned rats, shivering violently, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "Gott im Himmel," she breathed, the old Italian exclamation escaping her lips unbidden. They were the enemy. Her mind reeled. They were from the camp, surely, escaped. Terror, raw and primal, coursed through her veins. Her grip on the skillet tightened, knuckles white. These were the men her Antonio was fighting, the faces of the abstract evil the radio railed against. Her first instinctual thought was to run, to scream, to alert the authorities, but something held her rooted to the spot. As the initial wave of fear receded, replaced by a colder, more analytical assessment, she saw not monsters, but boys. Young, scared, utterly miserable. One, his fair hair plastered to his forehead, looked no older than Antonio had been when he left for boot camp. He coughed again, a wet, ragged sound that spoke of a deep chill. Another, tall and gangly, huddled into himself, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. They were not pointing weapons. They were not making threats. They were simply surviving. The internal battle was immediate, fierce, a silent war raging within her own heart. "They are the enemy, Maria," a voice shrilled, echoing the patriotic fervor that permeated the airwaves, the solemn weight of Antonio's distant sacrifice. "Report them. It is your duty." For Antonio. But another, older, deeper voice, rooted in the ancient soil of her heritage, spoke with equal force. This was the voice of her nonna, her mother, whispering tales of welcoming strangers, of the sacred duty of hospitality, of the boundless compassion woven into the very fabric of her Catholic faith. Are they not God's children, Maria? Hungry? Cold? Afraid? The images of Antonio in his crisp uniform, then as a baby in her arms, then again just now, that pale shivering boy in the corner of her barn, blurred and coalesced. Could she, Maria Benedetti, turn away those in such dire need, regardless of their uniform? Her son was fighting for freedom, for humanity. Was this not a test of that very humanity? Then, the aroma of minestrone, rich and earthy, wafted from the house, a sudden powerful anchor in her swirling thoughts. The pot was still simmering gently on the stove, a testament to comfort, to home, to love. The thought of those young men going hungry, of denying them the warmth of a meal, twisted her gut more violently than any fear. It was an insult to her very being, a betrayal of everything her mama had taught her. She made her choice, not with a grand declaration, but with a quiet, steely resolve that only a woman who had faced hardship could possess. She lowered the skillet, though she kept it within reach. Her voice, when it came, was surprisingly steady, tinged with her heavy Italian accent. "You, come inside. You are soaked. You will catch your death." Her tone left no room for argument, a blend of command and unexpected tenderness. The 4 POWs looked up, startled, their eyes darting between her and the open barn door. A tall, fair-haired one, who seemed to be the eldest, took a hesitant step forward, his voice a low, guttural German that she didn't understand. Maria simply waved a hand impatiently. "Inside, subito, now. You are hungry, no?" She knew hunger. She had seen it in her parents' eyes during the lean years. It was a universal language. Maria's kitchen, usually a space of solitary comfort, was transformed into a temporary sanctuary. The storm still raged outside, but within these 4 walls, a fragile, tentative peace settled. The air was thick with the rich scent of basil and oregano from the minestrone, mingled with the faint metallic tang of wet wool from their uniforms. She directed them with firm gestures, her words a blend of broken English and rapid Italian, pointing to the worn wooden table. "Sit, sit, no muddy boots on my clean floor, you hear?" They understood the unspoken command, their movements stiff with cold and suspicion. They were like frightened animals, their wary eyes following her every move as she bustled about, pulling out bowls, thick slices of her homemade bread, and a jug of water. She ladled the steaming minestrone into 5 bowls, setting one before each of them, then taking her own place at the head of the table. "Eat," she commanded, simple and direct. They hesitated, looking at each other, then at her. The eldest, the fair-haired one she now mentally dubbed Letters, seemed to make a decision. He picked up his spoon, his hand trembling slightly, and brought the soup to his lips. His eyes, initially clouded with fear, widened slightly, a flicker of something akin to wonder passing through them. The others followed suit. They ate ravenously at first, the primal urge of hunger overriding their caution, then slowed, savoring each spoonful. This was more than sustenance. It was a return to a forgotten comfort, a taste of home in a world that had become cold and alien. Maria watched them, her gaze keen and unflinching. She noted the hollows beneath their cheekbones, the raw, chapped skin on their hands, the subtle tremble that still afflicted them despite the warmth of the soup. They were just boys, really. One, small and dark-haired, reminded her faintly of Antonio's childhood friend, Pietro. She noticed a worn photograph tucked into Letter's uniform pocket as he shifted, a faded image of a smiling woman and 2 small children. A wife, a mother, perhaps sisters. The war had stolen so much from everyone, both victor and vanquished. She found a sewing kit and, without a word, took a torn sleeve from the gangly one she thought of as Klaus, carefully mending it with practiced ease. A small, wordless gesture of care. Communication was sparse, a mix of halting English from Letters, frantic German, and Maria's impatient but warm Italian. They tried to explain their predicament, their escape, their intention to return to the camp once the storm passed. Letters, through strained English and gestures, tried to convey their profound gratitude, an unspoken apology for intruding. Maria simply waved it away. Enough. Rest. Tomorrow, you go back. Today, you eat. You are young, like my Antonio. You need strength. She refilled their bowls, then offered them second helpings of bread, still warm from the oven. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the men relaxed. They spoke in hushed German, a current of relief and disbelief running between them. They felt a profound, bewildering debt to this small, formidable woman. They had come as enemies, but she had seen them as human beings. It was a powerful, almost religious experience. When they had eaten their fill, she led them to the barn again, now a bit drier and less forbidding. She spread clean, rough blankets on the hay. "Sleep," she said, pointing. "You will be safe here. No noise, no trouble." She stood for a long moment at the barn door, watching them settle, then closed it softly, the storm's roar a distant memory. Back in her kitchen, she sat by the window, peering out into the rain-swept darkness. The skillet lay discarded on the counter. The fear was still there, a low thrum beneath her ribs, but it was tempered by a strange, quiet satisfaction. She had done what was right. She had offered succor. Antonio would understand. He would be proud. The 4 German POWs, Letters, Klaus, Günther, and Hans, returned to Camp Concordia the following morning, their bellies full, their bodies rested, and their minds reeling from the bewildering kindness they had encountered. They had prepared for punishment, for the stern faces of their American guards. Instead, they carried a secret, a story so incredible it felt like a dream. Word of the Soup Lady of Kansas spread through the POW camp like wildfire. Not through official channels, of course, but through the clandestine network of whispers that thrived in such places. During work details, in the mess halls, during quiet moments in the barracks, the story was passed from man to man. "There's a woman," one would begin, his voice low, "an Italian woman, outside of town. If you're cold, if you're hungry, she gives soup." It wasn't just the soup, it was the warmth, the non-judgmental gaze, the simple act of seeing them as men, not just enemy soldiers. It became a legend, a beacon of hope in the monotonous, dehumanizing existence of captivity. For men who had faced the brutal realities of war, the cold indifference of capture, and the constant psychological toll of being an enemy on foreign soil, Maria's act was a profound reaffirmation of their humanity. It touched a chord deeper than patriotism or survival. It spoke to the soul. And so, a silent, extraordinary plan began to form. It wasn't an escape. They had nowhere to go, no allies, no means. This was something else entirely. It was a pilgrimage, a collective desperate longing for a moment of grace, a taste of that legendary soup. The word spread through the various work details. The farm laborers, the factory hands, the men clearing roads. Details were exchanged. Quiet understandings passed. On a chosen night, a new moon casting long concealing shadows, 150 German POWs, driven by a hope as potent as any military order, began their exodus. They moved in small, dispersed groups, avoiding patrols, their footsteps muffled by the soft Kansas dirt. They carried empty bowls, tin cups, even just their cupped hands, any vessel that could hold a measure of the mythical soup. They were a silent, spectral army, converging on a small, unassuming farmhouse, drawn not by the promise of freedom, but by the irresistible pull of unexpected kindness. Maria Benedetti awoke with the sun, as she always did. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, the air crisp and cool. A sense of quiet contentment settled over her. She made her coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and stepped out onto her small porch, intending to greet the new day. The first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of soft pink and gold, illuminating the dew-kissed fields. She sighed, a small sound of peace, and raised her cup. Then she saw them. Her coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the wooden planks of the porch. A gasp caught in her throat, a choked sound of utter disbelief and mounting horror. Her eyes, usually so sharp, struggled to comprehend the surreal tableau before her. Spilling across her yard, covering her porch, lining her fence line, stood an army. Not the enemy she had imagined in her fears, but an unnerving, silent throng of men, all in drab, striped uniforms or worn work clothes, their faces pale and expectant in the nascent light. 150 German prisoners of war. They stood like statues, unmoving, their gaze fixed on her. Many held empty bowls or tin cans, their hands clasped over them as if in prayer. They were not menacing. They were simply waiting. Letters, the fair-haired young man from the barn, stepped forward, his eyes earnest, a ghost of a hopeful smile touching his lips. He lifted his empty bowl, a silent offering, and in his halting, accented English, spoke a single, almost reverent word. Soup. The quiet stillness of the morning was shattered by the wail of sirens, growing louder with terrifying speed. Neighbors, awakened by the unusual sight of a silent gray mass on Maria Benedetti's property, had done their duty. Military police jeeps, local sheriff's cars, and even a battered civilian truck screeched to a halt at the end of Maria's driveway, stirring up clouds of dust. Doors slammed open and armed men, their faces grim and tense, poured out, weapons drawn and pointed directly at the bewildered assembly of POWs. "Hands up! Don't move!" a harsh voice barked through a megaphone. The German soldiers, initially calm and expectant, tensed, their faces now reflecting a mixture of fear and weary resignation. The air crackled with a dangerous energy, a hair-trigger moment between order and chaos. Maria, however, found an unexpected surge of defiance. Her horror had transmuted into a fierce protectiveness. She moved forward, stepping between the armed Americans and the expectant Germans, her small frame surprisingly formidable. "Stop! What are you doing?" she cried, her voice surprisingly strong, cutting through the megaphone's blare. Captain Miller, a stern-faced officer with a neatly trimmed mustache, stepped forward, his pistol still drawn. "Mrs. Benedetti, get back inside. These men are escaped prisoners. This is a dangerous situation." "Escaped?" Maria scoffed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "They came for soup. They are hungry, not escaping. Look at them. Do they look like men planning an escape? They are children, hungry children." Her voice rose, fueled by a righteous anger that bypassed fear. "My son Antonio is fighting in Europe, but these are just boys. They came to my barn last night, 4 of them, soaked and shivering. I gave them soup. They went back to your camp, and they told their friends. They came here for food, for kindness. You call this a war, Captain? To deny a hungry man a bowl of soup?" Her impassioned outburst seemed to hang in the air, a jarring note against the tense silence. Letters stepped forward again, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. speaking in careful, slow English. "Frau Benedetti. She is good woman. She gave us food. No escape. We came because she is kind. We were told she would feed us." Klaus, Gunther, and Hans, and then a murmur from the crowd of POWs echoed his sentiment. A chorus of "Soup, please," or "Thank you, Frau Benedetti," in German and broken English. They clutched their empty bowls, their eyes pleading. Captain Miller, initially disbelieving, lowered his pistol slightly, a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. He scanned the faces of the POWs, then Maria's, her espresso eyes blazing with an unyielding conviction. The local sheriff, a burly man named Gus, scratched his head, equally perplexed. This was no typical escape attempt. There was no aggression, no violence, just hunger and hope. "They're not armed, Captain," Gus mumbled, gesturing to the POWs. "And they sure don't look like they're going anywhere fast with bellies like that." Miller weighed the absurdity of the situation. 150 unarmed, hungry men gathered on an old woman's porch for breakfast. It was ludicrous. It was unheard of. But the scene before him, the raw humanity of it, was undeniable. He holstered his weapon, his jaw tight. "All right, Mrs. Benedetti," he conceded, a sigh escaping him. "All right. But this ends here. We'll set up a field kitchen. You supervise. And the rest of you," he barked at his men, "secure the perimeter. No one goes anywhere until these men are fed and returned to camp, understood?" A grudging compromise, born of necessity and the sheer, unyielding force of Maria Benedetti's will. Maria's kitchen, already a hive of activity during canning season, was now transformed into a bustling, improbable war zone of culinary compassion. The stern-faced Captain Miller, still wary but pragmatic, had dispatched a team to set up large field kitchen stoves on Maria's lawn. But it was Maria who took command, her movements precise and efficient. "More water. We need more vegetables. Who knows how to chop an onion without crying like a baby?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the rising clamor. Some of the POWs, those who had worked on farms or had kitchen experience, were quickly pressed into service, initially hesitant, then surprisingly eager. Letters, Klaus, Gunther, and Hans were Maria's immediate lieutenants, translating her rapid Italian and broken English into German, organizing the men, helping to peel potatoes and stir gargantuan pots of bubbling soup. The community, initially aghast and suspicious, slowly began to soften. Mrs. Henderson, Maria's usually prim next-door neighbor, arrived with a bushel of freshly picked corn. Mr. Peterson, the gruff farmer from down the road, appeared with sacks of flour for bread. The absurdity of the situation, coupled with Maria's unwavering resolve, chipped away at their fear and prejudice. They saw their neighbor, not a foreign sympathizer but a force of nature, protecting her own strange flock. And watching the German soldiers, their movements respectful, their faces etched with gratitude, slowly eased the tension. There was no defiance, no aggression, just a quiet, profound relief. The aroma of a hearty vegetable soup, enriched with bits of whatever meat Maria had salvaged from her freezer, mingled with the scent of freshly baked bread. Under the watchful eyes of the military police, the 150 German POWs formed an orderly line. Each man received a steaming bowl, a thick slice of bread, and a cup of lukewarm water. The silence that had initially been a harbinger of tension now became a testament to the profound moment. They ate, not with the frenzied desperation of escapees, but with a quiet, almost reverent gratitude. Small interactions began to break through the rigid lines of enemy and captor. A German POW, his eyes welling up, gestured to Maria, murmuring, "Danke, Mutti," the German word for mama. Another, surprisingly, pulled out a small harmonica and played a soft, melancholic German folk tune, a melody of longing and lost homes, which brought a few tears to Maria's own eyes. Maria moved among them, a small, bustling figure, refilling bowls, offering gentle words, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar joy. This, she realized, was her battle, not with guns or bombs, but with soup and kindness. She looked at the faces, no longer a blur of anonymous enemies, but distinct individuals. A young man with a crooked smile, another with eyes that held the wisdom of an old soul, another who nervously tapped his fingers. They were all someone's son, someone's brother. She had, in her own small way, found a pathway to peace, a bridge across the chasm of war. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across Maria's yard, the feast of humanity slowly concluded. The POWs, fed and temporarily at peace, were organized by Captain Miller and his men. The journey back to Camp Concordia was different this time. The military escort, initially a stern line of armed men, now moved with a more subdued air. The POWs, their bellies full and their spirits strangely uplifted, marched not as prisoners of war, but as men who had briefly tasted a different kind of freedom, the freedom of being seen, understood, and nurtured. Captain Miller, a man of regulations and military order, found himself writing a highly unusual report, detailing not an escape attempt thwarted, but a mass pilgrimage for soup. He emphasized Maria's unique influence, her courage, and the unexpected profound impact of her simple act of compassion. Maria Benedetti, the Italian widow from Kansas, became the Soup Lady. Her story, initially a local sensation, found its way into national newspapers, a human interest piece in the grim landscape of wartime news. She was no longer just a respected outsider. She was a local legend, a symbol of American kindness and resilience, though she accepted the attention with humble embarrassment. "I just fed hungry boys," she'd often say, shrugging, her hands flour-dusted from baking more bread. Captain Miller, whose perspective had been irrevocably altered by the event, made arrangements. Under strict supervision, Maria was allowed to occasionally provide her renowned soup for the POWs at the camp. Her visits became eagerly anticipated events, a small, consistent bridge between two worlds, a reminder that humanity could still thrive amidst the machinery of war. She'd bring her big pots, and the German soldiers would line up, a palpable sense of excitement in the air. And then, one day, a letter arrived. A thick, official-looking envelope, but inside Antonio's familiar scrawl. He had heard. News, it seemed, traveled even to the battlefields of Europe. He wrote of his initial confusion, his concern that his mother might be misconstrued, but then his profound pride. "Mama," he wrote, his words struggling to convey the depth of his emotion. "You fed the enemy, but you did it with love, with the heart of a saint. This is what we fight for, Mama. Not just to defeat them, but to remember who we are. You are winning the war as surely as I am." Maria clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face, a mix of relief and an overwhelming sense of vindication. Her son understood. He was proud. Years later, long after the war had ended, long after the camp had been dismantled, and the last German soldier repatriated, Maria Benedetti continued her quiet life. Her hair had turned to silver, her movements a little slower, but her eyes still held that unwavering warmth. One crisp autumn afternoon, a polished sedan pulled up her dirt driveway. An elderly gentleman, his hair white, his frame still tall, stepped out. He walked with a slight limp but moved with an air of quiet determination. His face, deeply lined, held a familiar spark in his eyes. He stood at her porch, a nervous but hopeful smile touching his lips. "Frau Benedetti?" he asked, his German accent softened by years. Do you remember letters, Klaus, Günther, Hans?" Maria's breath caught. Her hands, gnarled and frail, rose to her mouth. She remembered. Oh, she remembered. "I am letters," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "And I have come to thank you. For the soup. For the kindness. You showed us that even in war, humanity can survive." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small framed photograph, the same one she had glimpsed in his uniform pocket all those years ago. It showed his wife, now an older woman, and 2 grown children. "My family," he explained. "They knew of you. They have always known of the Soup Lady of Kansas." Maria, her own eyes brimming, simply opened her arms. He stepped forward, and in a timeless embrace, the former enemy soldier and the compassionate grandmother found a silent, profound understanding. It was a testament to the enduring power of a simple act, a single bowl of soup that had, against all odds, transcended the brutal chasm of war, leaving an indelible mark on lives separated by oceans and ideology, proving that kindness, in its purest form, was the most potent weapon of all. The story of Maria Benedetti, the Soup Lady, became a whispered legend in both Kansas and distant Germany, a quiet, insistent reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity, nourished by compassion, could always find its way home. If Maria's story moved you, if it sparked a thought about the extraordinary power of kindness in the face of adversity, then please let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your reflections on this incredible true tale. If you enjoyed this journey into history and humanity, consider giving this video a like. It truly helps us share more stories like Maria's. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel to discover more narratives that remind us of the enduring spirit of the human heart.